So we had already kind of talked about Big Bank on 6B, and we had calculated the standard deviation for Big Bank. Now we didn't have time in class, but we need to calculate the standard deviation for Best Bank. And so we wrote down all the waiting times for Best Bank, and to calculate the deviation, not the standard deviation, but the deviation, you need to subtract. So you take your 6.6 and you subtract your mean of 7.2. And so we would do this for each one of these values. This is going to give us negative 0.6. So 6.7 minus 7.2, negative 0.5. Another one of those. I'm slightly off having these lined up. I apologize for that. Okay. And we also talked about, and we'll go there in just a minute to remind you, but the calculator does these things for us. But you do need to kind of, to really understand what deviation is, it's good to know how is it calculated so that you can kind of wrap your mind around where's this number coming from. So they're taking each one of these waiting times. We are subtracting the mean, which was 7.2 from each one of these values, kind of to figure out, well, how far apart are all these numbers from the mean? Well, then you take all the answers and you add them up, okay? Actually, you don't have to, sorry, that's my fault. You don't need to add them up until you get to after you square them. Good morning. And so we're going to come over here and we're going to square each one of the answers. So negative 0.6 squared. Now remember, when you square these, they're always going to be positive. Okay, and so we're going to write down, I'm going to come back and write down all the answers for those. Do you want these notes that we're taking right now? Okay. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Here's this, and we're kind of on the back page of that, and here's the next ones we're going to do. So, squaring these values, which just simply means we're multiplying them by themselves. And I will post these completed notes because I know this is kind of hard to copy all of this stuff down. I'll post these completed notes so that you can have them. Then you're going to take this category and add everything up, and the sum of that is 1.98. Okay. We kind of talked about earlier how there's a difference between Big Bank and Best Bank in the aspect that Big Bank had a very wide range of wait times. Okay, and if you look at their sum, that number is a lot bigger here. Best Bank only went from 6.6 to 7.8. That's not as spread out. And their wait time and their standard deviation squared is also just 1.98 compared to this 38.46. Now, to calculate the standard deviation, so we already did Big Bank up here. We would take the square root of the sum of the standard deviation squared, which is what this number is. Okay, and then we would want to do n minus 1. So an n is the number of terms we have, and we have 11, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So the way that we would calculate this by hand is the square root of 1.98, because that is the standard deviation of all of these added up squared, and then 11 minus 1. And when you get the answer to that standard deviation, the final result is going to be 0.44 minutes, which is to be expected. It should be not as much as Big Bank because the wait times were not as spread apart. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the calculator just in case somebody did not see how we did this on the calculator. So let me pull that up real quick. So on the calculator, we went to type in our list of values. We went to stat, which is right here by the arrows. Stat, which is right here by the arrows. We hit enter because we wanted to edit something. Okay, this list 1 that I have typed in was my Big Bank, and list 2 was Best Bank, which is the one we were just talking about. Okay, so you type in your list. That's the first thing you need to do. Then if you hit your stat button again, right by the arrows, and you go over to calculate, okay, and hit enter, except for we don't want list 1 because list 1 was Big Bank and we're looking at Best Bank. So to change that to list 2, if you look above the number 2 at the bottom, there's an L2, a blue L2. Well, I need that blue L2. So I'm going to hit second 2, and I'll change it to list 2. So I want it to do all my calculations on the second list I put in. Okay, remember X bar is the mean. This is the sum of all the terms added up. This is the sum squared. Okay, look at this number right here, SX. There's our standard deviation that we found, that we did that whole calculation that took us forever and a decade to do. It's just here, 0.44. So you can just get that from your calculator. That's perfectly fine. These values, your minimum and like quartile 1, median, quartile 3, maximum, those help. That's your 5-number summary that we talked about in the last class. Those are important, and you can get all of those from this calculator. So I want to make sure that, and if you didn't, you might want to go back and look at the other video that will help you. It's already posted. So on 6B, if you want to go back and look at how do you type all this stuff in, we go a little bit slower there. Okay, so there is how to do that on the calculator. Go back to our notes. So that was a huge process. And let's face it, in life, sometimes you're not going to have a graphing calculator with you. And to do all of these calculations, that is crazy. So there is another way that you can kind of estimate the standard deviation. Now, this is not going to give you a perfect answer, but it does give you a value for standard deviation that's pretty close, and it's a whole lot easier to do. Okay, so it's called the range rule of thumb, and it tells you how to come up with it right here. So let's just do this. So it says use the range rule of thumb to estimate the standard deviations for the waiting time at Big Bank and Best Bank. So if we go and use this, let's do Big Bank. To do Big Bank's calculation, you take your range. This is what you do for every one of them, and you divide by 4. Well, to find the range of values, you do the biggest number minus the smallest number. So if we go back up here and look at Big Bank's values, we've got 4.1 and 11. That would be our range. So we would need to do, okay, what is 11 take away 4.1? Well, the answer to that is 6.9. and it's always going to be divided by 4. And when you do this, it's approximately 1.7 minutes. Okay, this is an estimate for standard deviation. The exact standard deviation that we got was 1.96. So again, this random range, I mean, that took me like 2 seconds to come up with though. This random rule of thumb is not perfect, but it will give you a good, you know, probably a good estimate, okay? So if we look at the same thing for Best Bank, their lowest value is 6.6, their highest value is 7.8. I need that to do the range rule of thumb. So for Best Bank, we want to do the range divided by 4, and their value, so we said 7.8 minus 6.6 divided by 4, which is going to give us 1.2 divided by 4, which is approximately 0.3 minutes. The actual answer for standard deviation we got up here was 0.44 minutes. So once again, not perfect, but not a, I mean, for an estimate, 0.3 is pretty close to 0.44. So it's not that, not bad either. And it was a whole lot easier than me doing all of that stuff to find that. Example 5 is the last example we're talking about in 6B. And it says studies of the gas mileage of a Prius under varying driving conditions show that it gets a mean of 45 miles per gallon with a standard deviation of 4 miles per gallon. Estimate the minimum and maximum gas mileage that you can expect under ordinary driving conditions. Okay, well, to get our lowest value, what you're going to want to do is take your mean and you're going to want to subtract 2 standard deviations. Okay, you're going to want to take your mean and you're going to want to subtract 2 standard deviations. Well, they told us in this problem that we have a mean of 45 miles per gallon. If minus 2 times our standard deviation, and our standard deviation is 4 miles per gallon, so that would be 45 minus 8, which is going to get me 37 miles per gallon. Okay, our highest value, well, it's the exact opposite. We're going to take our mean. Instead of subtracting 2 standard deviations, you're going to add 2 standard deviations. So we would start out with 45 plus 2 times 4. And that's going to be 45 plus 8, which is going to get us 53 miles per gallon. Okay, so in this problem, what does that mean? We're pretty confident that if they tell us that our Prius gets 45 miles per gallon, then that means that 95% of the time, we're going to stay in between this range of 37 miles per gallon to 53 miles per gallon. I don't know why I keep writing G there, but kind of gives us a range that we can depend on. This is basically what it's doing. And if we look at 2 standard deviations both ways, we can make some predictions about that. Okay, so that is all we have on 6B. We're going to go ahead and talk about, get started on 6C. I do not think we'll finish it. I'll probably finish it on Friday, and I'll post that video too. So let me save these so that I can post this. Hold on one second.